The Combine Empire were brutal in their occupation of Earth. Children were forced to work in factories, cremators wandered the streets as they annihilated waste and biohazards, and any who spoke out against their oppressors were tortured and mutilated into mindless drones as cogs in the Combine's workforce and army. The Half-Life 2 beta had so many enemies, locations, and features that did not make it into the retail game. Some of them were cut completely, while others were reworked into something new, in what some may call a darker and grittier version of Half-Life 2. Many of these features have become iconic, even though they never truly made it into an official Half-Life game. One of these cut features would have completely changed how a Combine-occupied Earth looked and felt as Gordon traversed City 17 and the Wasteland. What was the Air Exchange? Why was it so important to the beta story? And what remnants remain of it in the retail version of Half-Life 2? Here, we explore what we know behind the lore and story of the cut Air Exchange in the Half-Life 2 beta. The Resonance Cascade was the biggest disaster in human history. It was quickly followed by the biggest war in human history. A war between the whole of humanity against the multi-dimensional army of the Combine. Only 7 hours after this invasion began, humanity's armies were annihilated, and they had to accept that they were no match against the might of the Combine. In what at first appeared to be luck, one man, through an unknown method, managed to find a way to communicate with this alien force. On behalf of his entire species, he offered surrender in return for a life of submission. Having conquered yet another planet, the Combine got to work. Earth was home to humans, a new species that the Combine could experiment on and transform into new soldiers in their army. The planet itself also had valuable resources they required to fuel their war machine. As the years passed, the Combine treated the human population like cattle as they moved them into secure settlements across the planet. In Eastern Europe, City 17 was formed, and it was in these cities that they were watched, broken down mentally and physically, and were indoctrinated with Combine propaganda. Posters lined the walls, and the consul, the person who had offered submission on behalf of his species, worked with the Combine to keep the population subservient through consul casts. The human population lived in a society of fear. However, there was a small group that had not accepted their situation and worked in the shadows with the hopes that one day they would take down their alien overlords. With humanity controlled and contained within their settlements, the Combine adapted the planet. The oceans were drained with Combine portal technology and sent to other planets under Combine rule that required it. The weather control factory was built and used to manipulate Earth's weather. Citadels were constructed within the cities and acted as headquarters. A vast railroad was erected so that human and Combine units could be transported across the planet in safety. And outside these Combine-controlled regions, the creatures from Zen that had been pulled to Earth during the portal storms of the Resonance Cascade transformed a barren wasteland into their home. The Combine had systematically stripped away what had made Earth Earth, as they had contained the species that had once occupied it. Despite the damage that they had already done to the planet, there was one more change that this Universal Union wanted to make. For it, a new factory was required. The years of Combine occupation had taken a toll on the planet and humanity. As the days passed, the human population noticed that the air became harder and harder to breathe. Out in the wasteland, another factory had been developed by this alien force, and this region, the Air Exchange, had just one goal: to adapt Earth's atmosphere. This atmospheric reprocessing plant was huge. It had giant towers above ground, control rooms, tunnels, and an underground region with a core that powered the entire facility. This factory had been designed by the Combine's brightest minds to modify Earth's atmosphere, but for what reason? As of now, there are two theories. The first is that the air exchange was designed to open up a portal to siphon out Earth's atmosphere to be used to power a dimensional turbine. This turbine was then used to access new dimensions for the Combine to seek out and invade new planets. If this were the case, it would be awful to think about the countless planets that had been invaded and broken down into parts in the past. The second theory was that the air exchange was used for a more sinister purpose. Currently, the Resistance know the Combine Advisor to be the leaders of this army. Although powerful with their telekinetic abilities, Earth's atmosphere was not hospitable to them, so they had to change it. The air exchange was designed and constructed to replace the planet's air with a noxious, murky gas similar to the atmosphere of the Advisor's homeworld. In doing this, they could roam Earth freely without harm. Despite which of these stories is true, by the time almost 10 years had passed of Combine occupation, the human population were forced to wear gas masks in order to avoid this new, toxic air. While it was a horrific change that had been made to the planet, this one factory demonstrated just how advanced the Combine were, an impressive feat of engineering to completely manipulate the air of a whole planet. If the Combine were aligned differently, they could have used their technology to breathe life into planets instead. Sadly, this was not the case. This was an incredibly important stronghold for the Combine. To protect it from any harm or resistance activity, the Combine ordered the human arm of their army, the conscripts, to defend it. These soldiers were well trained and, for the most part, were subservient to their rulers. There were, however, some who worked undercover as a part of the resistance. Captain Vance was the leader of the conscripts, and he just so happened to be one of them. To further protect the facility, Combine scanners frequently surveyed the region and reported their findings back to Combine units. This was an advanced factory, and to run it, stalkers were deployed there to operate the systems and machinery. By design, they worked without question, and as an additional defense measure, the lasers that had been implanted into their eyes were perfect to take out any intruder that managed to bypass the scanners and Combine units. The Resistance wanted to take down the Combine and reclaim their planet. Their freedom, oceans, sanity, and general quality of life had been taken from them. The issue was that they were still fairly small in their numbers. They just needed to grow, and above anything else, required a spark to trigger a rebellion. Approximately 10 years after the invasion of the Combine, a man appeared out of thin air on a train as it entered City 17. Dr. Gordon Freeman was completely unaware what had happened in his absence, or that any time had passed at all. His involuntary storage in stasis had protected him from time and the dangers of a Combine-occupied world. The passengers in this carriage around Gordon all wore gas masks. This was odd to him. One of them, Samuel, noticed that Gordon did not have one. The wasteland was harsh, but there were still some who wanted to help those around them. He told the scientist, "Mister, you can't ride around like that. Where's your mask? Take one step without it, you'll be coughing up bloody foam." Almost by design, upon the arrival of the train, an undercover member of the Resistance working in the Combine army recognized Gordon. Barney Calhoun had worked as a security guard at Black Mesa, and he knew that Gordon had disappeared years before. He guided his old friend towards the lab of Dr. Eli Maxwell, where he was caught up on all the major events he had missed over the past decade. On the third day of his return, Gordon made his way towards Kraken Base, one of the few resistance bases. However, his train crashed into the depot of the air exchange. He knew how important this region was, and as the right man in the wrong place, he ventured towards the factory. Within this area, Gordon also met up with Alex Vance, the daughter of Captain Vance, and her pet alien Skitch. This was the spark Vance and his conscripts had needed to start the revolution. They had to shut down the air exchange. In his fight through the facility, Gordon took down the Combine soldiers still loyal to their leaders, the scanners that observed the surroundings for them, and the stalkers that were mentally programmed to defend the factory. The scientist then reached an elevator that took him up to a control tower. Up here, he fought with more soldiers, and then he heard the familiar sound of a Combine gunship. This was a critical region for the Combine. They needed it to function. Although these creatures had helped take down many resistance groups in the past, this gunship was nothing in comparison to Gordon's ability to survive in almost any situation. At the top of this tower, Gordon looked down and leapt into a pool of industrial solvents as he continued on his way deeper into the core of the air exchange. He avoided the aggressive pistons, projectiles of Combine units, and electrical currents of the machinery until he eventually reached the core. The deactivation of the air exchange became yet another one of the most significant moments in human history. This factory was regarded as a Combine stronghold, one of the most secure locations on the planet. If this region could be taken down, then surely the other Combine-controlled regions could be too. This spark ignited the uprising as resistance members came out in full force. The streets of City 17 became a battleground as everyone who could fight worked their way towards the Citadel. The air exchange was an essential part in the Half-Life 2 beta storyline. Its destruction was the signal for the Resistance to finally rise up and take over City 17. This may sound very familiar. In the retail version of Half-Life 2, the idea and symbol of the air exchange was adapted into the horrendous prison of Nova Prospekt, a very important and feared Combine location across the wasteland. When Gordon destroyed it, the Resistance rose up and the battle for City 17 began. As the air was breathable in Half-Life 2, it appears that the air exchange part of this feature was cut, and with it, those dark, smoggy streets were no more. It is a shame really. I loved this aesthetic, but the development of a Valve game goes through so many changes to give us those perfect games that are still very relevant decades later. Just look at these pieces of concept art. They are stunning. Unfortunately, that is all they were. A concept for a game we never received. The maps, however, were pretty much developed and finished. From what we can tell, they were last worked on in 2002, 2 years before the retail game came out. The air exchange would have been one of the most important and influential chapters in the Half-Life 2 story and world. Although it did not make the cut, its successor, Nova Prospekt, was pretty much perfect. The prison spread fear across the whole planet, and upon its destruction, completely changed the way humanity perceived the Combine. They too, just like them, had weaknesses. If you have made it this far, thank you so much. This is the first video of 2024 and I wanted to cover something that has fascinated me for a long time. The air exchange is the perfect way to explain just how powerful the Combine were. They stole Earth's atmosphere or adapted it just so that they could continue wars against other planets. The air exchange and weather control are my favourite cut parts of the Half-Life 2 beta. As of now, the air exchange chapter is currently just a collection of old maps and scripts. We know some of the plot points of how this chapter would have played out, but even with them, the information is still very limited. I wanted to go so much more into detail about why Gordon climbed the tower or jumped into the pool of industrial solvents, but we just don't know. I made this video to explore the air exchange, the little story and lore we know, and the impact it had on Earth. If you would like a more in-depth understanding of each of the maps themselves and how they changed through the years, I would highly recommend Radiation Hazard's video in which he goes through them version by version. I have linked this video in the description. It is all very interesting, but I am here for the lore. If you saw my opposing force video, you will understand that I do not understand game mechanics at all. While on the topic of brilliant Half-Life content creators, I would like to suggest the content of NoClick. They have a wealth of Valve. Mauricio Jara, I'm sorry if I said that wrong. He has well thought out and edited videos. He recently explored which facility was safer, Black Mesa or Aperture Science. There is EDC. In their latest video, they looked at how the Portal and Half-Life games are connected. A must-watch. Lambda Generation is the place to go for Valve news and updates. You all probably know Richter Overtime and NoClip, both amazing creators with hours of in-depth content. Purple Kernel has some very interesting videos that explore and analyze mostly Half-Life. And finally, Lucia, I hope I said that one right, has some brilliant videos. Recently, they created a 2-hour iceberg. Even in the grand year of 2024, the Half-Life and Portal community is still very much alive. I have linked all of these channels below. As for this channel, I have so many more topics I want to explore, and I cannot wait to show you what I have planned for the year. More lore, more timelines. I think that was everything I wanted to say. Please share this video, please like it if you did. Subscribe if you are interested in deeper dives into specific topics which I also cover on the channel. And finally, I would like to thank my gold tier patrons and channel members. Jonas, Lewis, Queen Arby, Fluffy the Dragon, Chicken Guy 791, Ruben Mendoza, Duke, Toadnut, Oren X, Azu, Karatana, AJ, Verona, Comfy, BG Games, Apravis, Arnis, Blaze of Glory, Cole Sherman, Yauli Rodriguez, and Nabar. Did you prefer the Air Exchange or Nova Prospekt? Did you like the darker aesthetic? And what would you like me to cover next? Please let me know in the comments below. This is where our story ends. Check back next week for a new one.